For years, Clara Monroe had chosen isolation over society. At 39, she lived in a weather-worn A-frame house, nestled deep within the frost-bitten woods of Pine Hollow. It was the kind of place that swallowed sound, where the snow came early and stayed long, and where the nearest neighbor was a vague rumor. Each morning was a routine of stillness, kindling the fireplace, warming her hands with a chipped mug of tea, and staring out into the whiteness that seemed to stretch forever. She wasn't running from the world, not exactly. But after losing her younger sister in a fire Clara blamed herself for, quiet felt like the only honest place to live. That evening had been like any other. A pot of soup simmered while the wind rattled the shutters. Clara had just settled into her armchair, wool blanket around her legs, when she heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping against the glass of the sliding door. Not the wind, not a branch, something else. She froze. The tap came again, then a third time. Her heart thudded. Slowly, cautiously, she stood and approached the glass. Through the blurry frost, two forms emerged, tall, silent, and unsettling. Wolves. Real, breathing wolves. One was larger, almost regal in posture, the other smaller and hunched with pain. Clara's breath caught. Logic screamed to stay away, to lock every door. But something in the wolf's eyes, worn, pleading, almost human, stopped her. The smaller one limped forward, pressing its nose against the glass with a low whine. They weren't hunting. They were asking. And for reasons she didn't understand, Clara unlocked the door. The door slid open with a reluctant groan, letting in a slice of Arctic wind that bit at Clara's face and curled around her ankles. She barely had time to react before the larger wolf nudged the injured one forward. They crossed the threshold with quiet urgency, their fur soaked and clinging with snow crystals, their ribs visible under the scraggly mass. Clara stepped aside instinctively, letting the door close behind them. For a breathless moment, she just stood there, watching wild predators settle on her living room rug like they belonged there. The injured one collapsed with a faint thump, its chest heaving as if every breath was a battle. The other stood close, alert, protective, never taking its eyes off Clara. She didn't move, didn't dare. Only when the injured wolf let out a whimper did she remember how to breathe. "I must have lost my mind," she muttered, then turned toward the fireplace. The flames had dwindled to embers. She tossed in logs and fanned the sparks until heat began to crawl back into the room. The wolves didn't advance, but they didn't retreat either. The larger one gave a low huff when she moved too quickly, so she made her steps slow and obvious. Her cabin, once a sanctuary for solitude, felt suddenly alive with presence and weight. She rummaged through her pantry and found some smoked venison strips. Kneeling a few feet away, she laid them down gently, her hand trembling. The injured wolf raised its head, nose twitching. The other growled softly, not in warning, but in caution. "You're safe," she whispered. "I think." They didn't respond. Not really. But they didn't run either. That, Clara figured, meant everything. As the firelight danced across their damp fur and her fingers thawed from the cold, she realized this wasn't going to be just one night. It was the beginning of something she couldn't name. Hours passed. Clara sat on the edge of her armchair, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the wolves. The larger one lay curled protectively around the smaller, ears twitching at every pop from the fire. The air inside the cabin grew warmer, but the tension remained thick. She hadn't dared to sleep. Not yet. They weren't pets. They weren't strays. They were wolves, wild, untamed. And yet here they were, sharing her living space like some surreal dream. She shifted slightly, and the larger one raised its head, golden eyes tracking her. Clara held her breath. "It's okay," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." She wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. The smaller wolf whimpered and tried to adjust its position. As it moved, Clara caught sight of its paw, a twisted, swollen mess. Blood had dried along the fur, and something sharp glinted under the wrapping of matted hair. A trap. Her stomach turned. She remembered the old wire snares some poachers used in these woods. It made her furious. She stood slowly and fetched the first aid kit from beneath the kitchen counter. Her hands trembled as she knelt, setting the kit on the floor near the rug. The larger wolf growled, not loud, but low and menacing. "I need to help," Clara murmured. She extended her hand, palm up, letting the wolf sniff. Its nose touched her fingers, cold and damp. For a moment, the world paused. Then the larger wolf stepped back, just enough for Clara to approach. She reached out to the smaller one's paw. It flinched but didn't pull away completely. The wound was worse than she feared, deep, infected, and pierced with a shard of rusted metal. Gritting her teeth, Clara set to work. It was careful, clumsy, slow. But when she was done wrapping the paw in clean gauze, she exhaled hard, her heart pounding like a war drum. They were still watching her. But they were letting her stay. Clara didn't sleep that night. Not really. She drifted in and out of a foggy doze, always half alert, always listening for the crunch of claws or a growl that might signal regret in the wolf's choice to trust her. But the cabin stayed quiet. In the pale gray hush of morning, Clara stirred beneath her blanket. The fire had dimmed again. Frost edged the inside of the windows, like delicate lace. She pulled herself from the chair and glanced at the rug. The wolves were still there. The smaller one rested its head on the other's side, breathing shallow but steady. The larger had its eyes open, watching her with that same unreadable gaze, somewhere between suspicion and quiet understanding. Clara crouched near the fireplace, feeding it fresh wood and coaxing the flame alive. As warmth spread through the room, she heard soft sounds from behind, low whines, almost questions. She turned, unsure what they wanted. Then it clicked. They were hungry. She gathered what she could: more venison jerky, a can of salmon, leftover stew from the night before. As she laid the food down gently, the larger wolf rose stiffly, wincing slightly as it shifted weight on an unseen injury. Still, it moved forward, sniffing, then eating cautiously. The smaller one nibbled at the salmon before retreating again, its strength clearly still fragile. Clara knelt, arms wrapped around her knees. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she asked softly. No answer, of course. Just the flick of a tail and the crunch of jerky. She knew this couldn't last. The wolves couldn't stay here forever, but neither could they survive in this condition out there. She thought of the nearest vet, miles away, and the roads, likely buried. Even radio contact would be spotty this deep in the woods. For now, all she could do was wait, watch, and care. And maybe, just maybe, heal something in herself, too. It was mid-morning when Clara noticed the bandage was soaked through again. The smaller wolf had stirred, shifting its weight, and a small patch of red bloomed through the gauze. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew enough about wounds to recognize that this wasn't healing properly, not without help. The smell alone hinted at infection. She approached slowly, murmuring soft nothings, trying to calm both the wolves and herself. The larger wolf rose immediately, placing itself protectively in her path. Its growl wasn't loud, but it made Clara freeze. "I'm not here to hurt her," she whispered. She dropped to her knees, keeping her posture small. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. For a tense second, neither of them moved. Then the large wolf stepped aside, only barely, but enough. Clara leaned in, hands shaking as she peeled back the soaked gauze. The paw was swollen now, pink and angry. As she cleaned it gently, her fingers brushed against something solid, a sliver of rusted metal. Oh no. She remembered traps, the illegal kind, cruel and forgotten, the kind no animal should have to endure. Rage surged in her chest. She fetched a pair of tweezers and slowly, carefully, worked the fragment out. The wolf whimpered, flinched, but didn't bite. "You're brave," Clara whispered. Her vision blurred for a moment. A flash of memory, smoke, screaming, and her sister's hand slipping from hers in the fire. Clara shook it off. This wasn't the past. She wasn't powerless now. She disinfected the wound, rewrapped the paw in fresh cloth, and backed away slowly. The large wolf hadn't moved. It watched her the entire time, with an intensity that made her feel like she was being measured, judged, and somehow passed. Clara slumped against the wall, exhausted. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. The cabin was quiet, save for the steady crackle of the fire and the occasional soft breath from the wolves. Outside, the forest groaned under the weight of fresh snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pale, frozen world. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the horizon. She'd spent the last 5 years convincing herself solitude was peace. But now, with 2 injured wolves curled up on her floor, her house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive. Still, reality was creeping back in. They couldn't stay forever. Wolves belonged to the wild, not inside 4 wooden walls. But the smaller one was in no shape to travel, and the larger, though strong, had a limp Clara hadn't noticed until now. And if she did nothing, they'd die. She turned from the window, grabbing a small 2-way radio from the shelf. It was ancient, battered, and not always reliable, but sometimes it caught a signal from the nearby ranger station or the vet's outpost in Glenridge. She fiddled with the dial, whispering into the receiver. "Anyone out there? This is Clara Monroe in Pine Hollow. I need help. I've got 2 injured animals. One's badly hurt. Please respond." Static. Then silence. She tried again. And again. Still nothing. She stared at the device, defeated. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe no one was listening. But the thought of waiting days, possibly weeks, for the roads to clear, it made her stomach churn. The wolves needed help now. She glanced over. The smaller one lay still but breathing. The larger raised its head when their eyes met. Clara's voice came out hoarse. "I'll find a way." She had to, not just for them, but for the part of herself that still believed in saving what others would abandon. The next morning, Clara awoke to a chilling silence. The fire had dwindled to faint embers, and the cabin's warmth had faded into a biting cold. She groaned, rolling out of bed, muscles stiff, head foggy from barely sleeping. The wolves hadn't moved much. The smaller one lay motionless, its chest rising and falling just enough to prove it was still alive. The bandaged paw looked angry again, redder than before. Time was running out. Clara knelt beside it, gently resting her hand on the floor, just inches away. "Hang in there," she whispered. Then she stood. If the radio wouldn't reach anyone, maybe she could reach someone herself. She bundled up quickly, thermal layers, scarf, thick boots, and grabbed a map from a drawer. The nearest help was still Glenridge, hours away by truck, if the roads were open. But maybe there was another way. She scanned the edges of the map and saw something. An old Firewatch outpost marked about 3 miles northeast, up the ridge. It was abandoned, but the tower might still have a functioning antenna. It was a long shot, but better than sitting and hoping. Clara scribbled a note and left it on the table beside the wolves. Going for help. Stay strong. Don't die on me. She paused, then added a smiley face. It felt stupid and right. Grabbing a thermos and a flare gun from her emergency box, she gave the wolves one last look. The larger one met her gaze. There was no way it understood, but something in its eyes gave her courage. Then Clara stepped outside. The snow was knee-deep. The cold wrapped around her like a warning. Still, she pushed forward, toward the ridge, toward the tower, toward whatever help she could find. Somewhere behind her, in that quiet cabin, 2 wolves waited, and Clara, who'd once stopped believing she could save anyone, was beginning to believe again. The forest didn't welcome her. Branches, heavy with snow, sagged over the trail, forcing Clara to duck and weave. Each step sank into the icy crust, her boots cracking through with a sound that echoed like shattered glass. Her breath came in plumes, and the cold bit at her lashes. But she didn't stop. Every few minutes, she checked the tree line for markers, faint red blazes on bark she remembered painting years ago. Back then, she'd hiked for solitude. Today, she hiked for life. Her legs ached, her hands numbed through even the thickest gloves. The wind hissed warnings between the trees, but just as her resolve began to splinter, she saw it. The watchtower. It rose out of the trees like a skeleton of the past. Wooden stairs warped, metal antenna barely intact. But it was still there, still standing. Clara didn't hesitate. She climbed, one frozen plank at a time, ignoring the creaks beneath her weight. At the top, she burst into the small cabin, coughing from the cold air and effort. The room was mostly empty. Dust, a rusted stove, a cot with chewed blankets. But near the window sat a dusty transmitter with a cracked microphone. She brushed it off, fingers fumbling with the knobs. "Please," she muttered, voice hoarse. "Please work." She flipped the main switch. A faint red light blinked. Alive. She took a breath and keyed the mic. "This is Clara Monroe. Emergency transmission. I'm at the Pine Ridge Watchtower. I have 2 injured wolves. One is in critical condition. If anyone hears me, please respond." She let go. Nothing. She tried again, then again. Then, a burst of static. A broken voice. "Copy. Location." Her heart leapt. "Pine Hollow, near the old logging trail. I need help. Please." A pause. Then, "We're dispatching someone. Sit tight." Clara sank to her knees in the icy dust, eyes brimming. Help was coming. The descent from the tower felt quicker, but far more dangerous. Clara's legs shook with exhaustion, and the narrow steps were slick with frost. She gripped the railing tight, heart pounding with each creak of the wood. The storm clouds were returning, and the wind had picked up again, tossing flakes sideways across her vision. By the time she made it back to the tree line, her coat was soaked through, and her knees barely responded. She pushed forward anyway, retracing her trail through the snow. Her thoughts fixed on the wolves, on the smaller one's failing strength, on the bigger one's patience that couldn't last forever. She had to get back. She had to be there when help came. Halfway down the ridge, Clara froze. Footprints, not hers, not animal. Boot prints, fresh. They led toward her cabin. Her breath caught. She followed the trail cautiously, adrenaline cutting through the cold. As she neared her property, she heard it. Voices. One was female, muffled through the trees. Clara stepped faster, then stumbled into the clearing, chest heaving. A woman stood on her porch, wrapped in a thick white parka. Her gloved hand hovered just above the cabin door, as if she were deciding whether to knock again. Clara's shout came out broken. "Hey!" The woman turned. "Clara Monroe?" she asked. "I'm Rowan Price, Wildlife Response Team, Glenridge Station. You called for help?" Clara staggered up the steps. "Yes, they're inside. The wolves." Rowan's expression shifted from professional calm to open concern. "Two wolves." Clara nodded. "One's badly hurt. They came to me." Rowan blinked. "Came to you?" Clara pushed the door open, revealing the warmth, and the wolves inside. Rowan's mouth parted in stunned silence. "Well," she whispered, stepping in, "this is something else." And for the first time since this ordeal began, Clara didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. Rowan stepped inside slowly, like she was entering sacred ground. Her eyes scanned the cabin. First the bandaged wolf resting near the fire, then the larger one curled beside it, alert, wary. The air felt thick with tension. Rowan didn't speak right away. She knelt beside the threshold, unzipped her parka, and pulled off her gloves. Clara hovered close. "They've been like that since last night," she whispered. "The little one's paw is bad. I cleaned it, but it's not healing." Rowan nodded, her expression sharpening with professional focus. "I've worked with wildlife rescues for 6 years," she said quietly, "but I've never walked into a scene like this." She crouched lower, moving with deliberate calm. "Let's try not to scare them. Wolves can smell adrenaline." Clara watched, holding her breath, as Rowan extended a flat palm toward the larger wolf. It didn't move, but its gaze locked on her hand. "Easy," Rowan murmured. "I'm not your enemy." The bandaged wolf gave a faint whine, stirring slightly. "I need to check her injury," Rowan said, "but she won't let me if he thinks I'm a threat." Clara nodded. "He's been guarding her non-stop." "Then we'll do this together," Rowan said, glancing up. "You stay close. Talk to him. Keep his focus on you." Clara's pulse pounded. "What if he panics?" Rowan gave a wry smile. "Then we back off, slowly, no sudden moves." Together, they approached. Clara sat near the wolf's head, whispering soft words. The large wolf's ears flicked toward her, hackles twitching. But he stayed still. Rowan knelt beside the injured one and began unwrapping the bandage. The smell of infection hit instantly. She frowned. "She needs antibiotics. Soon." "Can we move her?" Clara asked. Rowan didn't answer immediately. "I have supplies," she said at last, "but we'll need to work fast." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they began the quiet race to save a life. Rowan finished examining the wound with practiced hands, her movements slow and steady. Clara knelt beside her, eyes bouncing between the wolves and the field kit Rowan had placed open on the floor. The smell of antiseptic filled the cabin. "She's lucky," Rowan murmured. "If that metal shard had gone deeper, it might have hit bone." Clara swallowed. "Lucky seems like a strange word." Rowan gave a thin smile. "Out here, it's the only one we've got." The larger wolf shifted, his tail thudding softly against the rug. His golden eyes never left Rowan's hands. He was coiled like a spring, watchful, ready. "I've got antibiotics in my pack," Rowan said. "Injectables. But the dose has to be precise, and she's already weak." Clara nodded. "Tell me what you need." "I need you to keep him calm," Rowan said, gesturing toward the bigger wolf. "If he decides I'm a threat, this ends fast, and badly." Clara exhaled shakily. "Got it." She scooted closer to the larger wolf, letting her voice drift into a soft hum. half lullaby, half nonsense. The same kind of tone she once used to calm her sister during storms, back when they were kids and the world still made sense. The wolf blinked slowly. His breathing was shallow but steady. Rowan readied the syringe, then paused. "I'm going in." Clara kept talking. "It's okay. We're helping her. You're both going to be okay." Rowan leaned in and slipped the needle into the smaller wolf's flank. The animal flinched, let out a muffled yip, but didn't struggle. Clara felt her own breath release. The larger wolf growled, a low, uncertain sound, but didn't move. "She did great," Rowan whispered, finishing the injection. "It's in. Now we wait." Clara looked at her, eyes wide. "For what?" "For the fever to break, and hope she's strong enough to fight." Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet, steady, relentless. Inside, time slowed, and trust, fragile as frost, settled between them all. Hours passed. Clara sat cross-legged near the fire, watching the steam rise from a pot of reheated soup. Her eyes kept flicking toward the wolves. The injured one lay still, curled tightly, her breathing shallow but steady. The larger one remained close, his chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but never fully asleep. Rowan sat opposite Clara, jotting notes into a small, weather-stained notebook. Every few minutes, she'd glance up and check the bandage or count breaths, her brow furrowed with quiet calculation. Clara broke the silence. "Do you think she's going to make it?" Rowan didn't answer right away. She set her pencil down. "She's holding on. That's more than some would." Clara stared into the fire. "I never thought I'd end up here, in a cabin, with 2 wolves." Rowan smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But sometimes nature doesn't ask." They lapsed into silence again. Outside, the wind had died. Snowflakes drifted lazily against the glass. The world felt hushed, like it was waiting for something. Rowan stood and stretched. "I've got a colleague, Dr. Harold. He's a vet in Glenridge. If I can get a signal, maybe he can guide us through the next steps." "You think we can save her here?" Clara asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. But we've already come this far." Rowan moved toward the radio Clara had used earlier and tried adjusting the frequency. Static hissed, then silence. Then, crackling words. "Clara Monroe, this is Glenridge Response. We received your message." Clara shot to her feet. "They answered?" Rowan nodded, adjusting the dial. "They're asking for coordinates." Clara rushed to grab the old map, hands trembling. "Here, this ridge, this trail. This is where we are." Rowan relayed the details through the mic, voice calm and clear. "We have 2 wolves, 1 critical, 1 stable but injured. Cabin is accessible only by snowmobile or heavy truck." A pause. Then a voice replied, "Copy that. Preparing to dispatch." Clara met Rowan's eyes. Help was coming. And for the first time in days, hope no longer felt like a foolish thing to hold. Clara stood at the window, her fingertips brushing the cold glass. Outside, the snowfall had thickened again. Fat, lazy flakes drifted down, coating the trees and smothering the landscape in silence. But beneath that stillness, something felt off. She leaned closer. "Do you see that?" she asked. Rowan looked up from the fire. "See what?" Clara pointed toward the edge of the forest trail, where the trees began to thin. "There, tracks." They were faint, barely visible but unmistakably fresh. A trail of footprints, too large to be fox, too narrow to be moose. Rowan stood and squinted. Those weren't there before. Clara's chest tightened. "You think it's another animal?" Rowan hesitated. "Or someone on foot. But who would be out here?" She moved toward the door, reaching for her coat. "Stay inside," she said. "I'm going to check." "No way," Clara replied firmly. "We go together." They stepped outside into the frigid air, snow crunching underfoot. Clara clutched a small flare gun in one hand, more for reassurance than defense. The prince led toward the side of the cabin, then veered into the woods, disappearing into deeper snow. Suddenly, from deeper in the trees, a shadow moved. Clara grabbed Rowan's sleeve. "Did you see that?" Rowan narrowed her eyes. "Stay close." They advanced a few paces, then a voice, faint, female, called out from beyond the trees. "Hello? Is someone there?" Both women froze. Then, out of the snowy haze, a figure emerged. A woman bundled in layers, her face nearly hidden, behind a scarf and goggles. "I'm part of the veterinary team from Glenridge," she shouted. "We came by snowmobile, but the path split. I lost the others." Clara's breath rushed out in relief. Rowan waved her arms. "Over here, the cabin's close." They turned back toward the house, the stranger trailing behind. Inside, the wolves stirred as the door opened again. This time, it wasn't danger. It was help. The moment the woman stepped inside, the warmth of the cabin rushed over her like a blanket. She pulled off her goggles and scarf, revealing flushed cheeks and bright, intelligent eyes. "I'm Dr. Serena Voss," she said quickly, her breath still fogging. "Where are the wolves?" Clara pointed to the hearth. "There, she's the one with the infected paw. He won't leave her side." Dr. Voss knelt without hesitation, unzipping a compact medical kit. "We got your transmission. My team's following behind with the rest of the supplies. I took a shortcut through the woods hoping to get here faster." Rowan nodded, already at her side. "She's had a preliminary dose of antibiotics, but the infection's advancing. We managed basic care, but it's beyond our field capacity." Dr. Voss studied the smaller wolf, then glanced at the larger one. "He's protective," she murmured, "but not aggressive. That's a good sign." She extended a gloved hand slowly toward the injured paw. The wolf whimpered but didn't pull away. Clara watched, heart in her throat, as the vet unwrapped the bandage and examined the wound under the glow of her headlamp. "Abscess is forming," Dr. Voss said. "We'll need to drain and flush it, possibly suture depending on the depth. She's strong, though, still responsive." Clara swallowed. "Can you do it here?" Dr. Voss nodded. "I've done worse surgeries in worse places. But we'll need to sedate her again. Properly this time." Rowan moved to assist. "We've got sedation gear in her SUV. Bill and Elias are retrieving it now." Dr. Voss turned to Clara. "You've done an incredible job keeping them alive. That's not easy, especially not here." Clara looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't let them die on my floor." The wolves shifted slightly, their eyes flicking between the three women. Dr. Voss rolled up her sleeves. "Then let's make sure they don't." Time slowed. Clara held a lantern steady in one hand, while Dr. Voss and Rowan prepared the sedation kit. The smaller wolf lay curled near the hearth, her breathing shallow, her injured paw twitching now and then, as if even sleep couldn't pull her from the pain. The larger wolf hovered close, tense but silent, watching every move. "We'll go with a mild tranquilizer," Dr. Voss said. "Enough to numb the pain and keep her still, not so much that it risks her heart rate." She loaded the syringe and knelt slowly beside the injured wolf. Clara could feel her own heartbeat hammering in her throat. Rowan looked at her. "We might need your help calming the male." Clara nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." She moved closer, lowering herself beside the larger wolf, speaking in low, steady tones. "It's okay. We're helping her. You've done so much. Let us take care of her now." The wolf didn't growl, but his eyes never left Dr. Voss's hand. With one precise motion, the vet delivered the injection into the smaller wolf's thigh. A soft yelp escaped, and the male immediately lunged a step forward. Clara held her ground, one hand raised, voice firm but gentle. "She's safe. It's okay." The tension crackled in the air. Then, slowly, the male stepped back, muscles still coiled, but restrained. "She's drifting under," Dr. Voss said, her voice calm. "Vitals are stable. We can begin." Rowan unpacked the tools, laying them out on a clean cloth. "We'll need you to keep the lantern close." Clara adjusted the light as the two women worked with practiced efficiency, flushing the wound, removing dead tissue, stitching what they could. It was quiet, focused, and intense. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then finally, Dr. Voss leaned back, wiping her brow. "It's done. She's going to need rest, but she has a chance now." Clara looked down at the sleeping wolf. "She fought," she whispered, "and so did we." It was nearly midnight when they finished. The storm outside had faded into a gentle drift of snow, tapping softly on the windows like a lullaby. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by the flicker of the fire and a single lantern on the table. Clara stood beside the hearth, watching the wolves sleep. The smaller one lay curled in blankets, her newly stitched paw wrapped with fresh gauze, her chest rising and falling with measured rhythm. The sedative still held her in a soft haze. The larger wolf had finally laid his head down, close, but no longer rigid with tension. He had allowed it. That meant something. Rowan sat near the wall, legs stretched out, her back against a stack of firewood. "That was intense," she murmured. Dr. Voss smiled faintly as she packed her supplies. "I've done roadside surgeries before, but this? A snowbound cabin with two semi-wild wolves and a woman who never stopped trying?" She looked at Clara. "It's going in the books." Clara blinked, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "I didn't do much. I just kept them warm." Rowan shook her head. "You opened the door. That's not nothing." Clara didn't answer. She just watched the wolves again. Something was shifting inside her. The walls she had built, quiet walls of grief, of guilt, had cracks now. And through those cracks, warmth was seeping in, not just from the fire, from them, from the moment she chose not to turn them away. Dr. Voss stood and pulled on her parka. "The others should arrive by morning. We'll figure out transport then. For now, we rest." Rowan nodded and unrolled a sleeping mat near the back wall. Clara remained standing, one hand resting on the old armchair. She didn't want to sleep just yet, because for the first time in years, her house felt full, and her silence wasn't loneliness anymore. Dawn arrived quietly, casting a soft silver glow across the snow outside. Clara blinked awake in her chair, her neck sore, her arms curled under a wool blanket. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw them. The wolves, still asleep near the hearth, Rowan snoring lightly under her coat near the door. Dr. Voss, gone, probably outside checking the horizon for her team. Clara sat up slowly. The smaller wolf stirred first. Her bandaged paw shifted, and she gave a soft sigh, half whimper, half exhale. Clara leaned forward, careful not to startle her. "You made it through the night," she whispered. The larger wolf opened his eyes next. He didn't rise, but his gaze moved straight to Clara, unreadable and steady. This time it didn't feel like suspicion, more like recognition. Clara offered a small smile. "You kept her alive. Guess we're even now." The fire had burned low, just glowing coals. She added 2 more logs, nudging the embers until they caught. The soft crackle of flames felt like breath, returning to the room. Behind her, Rowan stretched and yawned. "You're up early." "Didn't sleep much," Clara said. Rowan rubbed her eyes. Neither did they. She whimpered once or twice, but settled again. Dr. Voss reappeared at the door, shaking snow from her coat. Still no sign of the others, but the storm's clearing. With any luck, they'll make it up the trail by midday. She glanced at the wolves. "How's our girl?" Clara nodded. "Alive, still resting." "Good," Voss replied. "That's all she needs right now." They sat in silence for a while, just the 3 women and 2 wolves in a cabin at the edge of nowhere. No beeping monitors, no steel tables, just warmth, breath, and the fragile line between wilderness and something more. Clara looked around and exhaled. Whatever came next, she was ready, because she wasn't alone anymore. Late morning crept in, gray and still. Clara stepped onto the porch, bundled in her coat, a mug of hot tea steaming in her hands. The snow had softened, blanketing the forest like a sleeping giant. No wind, no sound, just silence. Until it wasn't. From deep in the trees, a sound rose, a low, distant howl, long, haunting, not close enough to be threatening, but not so far it could be ignored. Clara turned her head sharply. Another howl followed. Then a third, shorter, sharper, the wolves' language. She stepped back into the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Rowan looked up from where she was checking the smaller wolf's temperature. "Hear what?" "A howl, out there." Rowan frowned and moved to the window. That could be wild. Maybe from a pack. Clara's heart beat faster. What if it's their pack? Dr. Voss joined them, arms crossed. It's possible. Wolves will sometimes search for missing members, especially if they're bonded. Clara looked back at the larger wolf, who now stood at the door, alert. His ears were forward, his body tense. And then, he answered. A single low howl rumbled from his chest, not aggressive, not desperate, just calling back. The cabin fell silent. "That was deliberate," Rowan whispered. The smaller wolf stirred on the rug, lifting her head weakly. Her ears twitched at the sound. "They know," Clara said, her voice soft. "Their pack's close." Dr. Voss was already moving. "We'll need to be careful. If that's a full pack, we don't want them getting too close to a structure with humans. But it also means..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Clara did. "It means they have somewhere to go. A place beyond this cabin. A place they were trying to return to." And Clara realized, maybe her role wasn't to keep them. Maybe it was to help them find their way back. By midday, the faint hum of an engine broke the stillness. Clara stepped outside again, shielding her eyes. A snowmobile crested the ridge, followed by another. Figures bundled in winter gear waved from behind their visors. "They're here," she called over her shoulder. Inside, Rowan and Dr. Voss sprang into action. Blankets were adjusted, bags zipped, gear packed. The cabin shifted from survival mode to transition. Clara met the team outside, 2 young medics and a driver named Jeff, who looked like he'd wrestled more than one moose in his lifetime. "Rough trail," he said gruffly, pulling off his gloves. "But we made it. You the one who called in the wolves?" Clara nodded. "Well," Jeff muttered, glancing at the cabin, "this ought to be interesting." Inside, the wolves were already stirring. The larger stood protectively again, sensing change. The smaller lifted her head, ears perked weakly. "We sedate her again," Dr. Voss explained to the team. "Just enough to transport safely. Him. We might not have to." Jeff raised an eyebrow. "He gonna walk into a sled crate on his own?" Clara stepped forward. "He trusts me. I think if I lead him, he'll follow. They didn't question her. They just worked. The next hour was a blur of careful movements, mild sedation, warming wraps, soft commands. The smaller wolf was lifted into a padded carrier, with Rowan beside her, monitoring vitals. The larger watched it all, tense but restrained. Then Clara opened the cabin door wide. The male wolf turned to her. She didn't speak. She just stepped onto the snow-packed trail, pausing at the edge, and he followed. No leash, no command, just quiet understanding. Dr. Voss shook her head. I've never seen anything like it. As the team loaded the sleds and started the engines, Clara lingered at the cabin's edge. She looked back once at the doorway, at the fire, the blankets, the home that had held them all. Then she climbed aboard. They were leaving, and something in her chest said, this was right. The sled jolted forward, cutting cleanly through the snow. Clara sat between two supply crates, the cold biting through her layers, but her thoughts far away from discomfort. The smaller wolf slept beside Rowan, bundled in insulating wraps, her breath slow and steady. The larger one padded just behind the sled, his paws silent against the frozen trail, eyes fixed ahead, tail low but relaxed. They were moving toward something unknown and away from something sacred. The trees thinned as the sled descended into a wide clearing, blanketed in silver. Clara looked back once and caught the fading outline of her cabin, the crooked chimney, the smoke trail dissolving into wind, the tiny home that had become something more over 2 impossible days. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Ahead, the radio crackled from Jeff's sled. Dr. Harold says the clinic's prepped. Warm rooms, supplies, antibiotics. They'll be ready when we arrive. Rowan nodded, shouting over the engine, "We'll stabilize her fully there. And if all goes well, she can recover in a safe, controlled space." Clara glanced at the wolves. What happens after that? Rowan hesitated. Depends. If she regains full mobility, they'll be candidates for release. Clara's brow furrowed. Together? That's the plan. She exhaled. Something about the word release felt heavier than it should. Not sad, just final. Like closing a chapter. The larger wolf moved closer to the sled, now walking alongside Clara. His golden eyes met hers. She reached out slowly, gloved fingers brushing the edge of his thick coat. He didn't pull away. "I'll let you go," she whispered, "but not before you're ready." The forest opened wide as the trail dipped into a valley. In the distance, the town shimmered faintly against the snow. Clara looked forward again. She wasn't sure who was rescuing who anymore. The sleds rolled to a stop just outside a modest building, tucked behind a snow-packed fence. The Glenridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. It wasn't large, but warm light glowed from the windows, and steam curled from the roof vent like a promise. Jeff cut the engine and turned. "We're here." Clara stood slowly, legs stiff from the ride. The wolves remained still. The smaller one rested peacefully in her carrier, sedative, still keeping her calm. The larger wolf, now dusted in wind-blown snow, stood behind the sled, tail twitching as he surveyed the new place. Rowan hopped down first and moved toward the front door, signaling with her radio. Within seconds, the team was already emerging. Gloved hands, rolling carts, heated blankets. Clara stepped aside as Dr. Voss and 2 staffers carefully lifted the carrier and rushed the injured wolf inside. Rowan stayed close to the larger wolf. "We're going to need to walk him in." "I'll do it," Clara said. She stepped forward, kneeling slightly. "You with me?" The wolf blinked slowly. Clara turned and walked toward the building, not looking back. A moment later, she heard the soft crunch of snow behind her. He was following again. Inside, the rehab center smelled of antiseptic and cedar. The floors were warm beneath her boots, and the air buzzed with quiet urgency. The carrier was being wheeled into a quiet recovery room, lined with straw bedding and medical equipment. Dr. Harold, a silver-haired man in a heavy vest, gave Clara a nod of respect. "She's lucky," he said, already checking vitals. "You gave her a chance." Clara didn't reply. She watched as the larger wolf stopped just inside the door, sniffing the air, muscles tight with uncertainty. But he didn't flee. He stood guard. Again. Rowan turned to Clara. He hasn't left her side once, not even now. Clara looked at them, this strange, quiet pair who had walked into her world and rewritten it. And she whispered, "Neither will I." The walls of the rehab room were painted a soft forest green, as if the designers had tried to recreate a sense of the wild within the safety of walls. But it wasn't the color Clara noticed most. It was the quiet. The injured wolf, now lying on a thick bed of straw, was sleeping more peacefully than Clara had yet seen. An IV was attached to her front leg, antibiotics slowly dripping in. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The larger wolf lay beside her again, paws crossed, his nose tucked close to her flank. He hadn't touched the food in the corner. He hadn't moved at all. Dr. Harold stood by the monitors, jotting notes onto a clipboard. "No fever. That's a good sign," he said. "The infection's backing off." Clara nodded, arms wrapped around herself. "You're welcome to stay in the observation room," he added. "We've had human companions in here before, when the animals bond." Rowan entered carrying a tray, 2 mugs of coffee and a sandwich. "Eat," she ordered gently, offering 1 mug to Clara. Clara took it but didn't drink. "How long will she need to stay?" "Could be days, could be weeks," Dr. Harold said. "Depends on her strength, her will to heal." Clara glanced at the male. "And him?" "He's her best medicine," Rowan said simply. They sat in silence again, listening to the soft hum of the heater, the occasional beeping of the IV monitor. It wasn't the wilderness, but it wasn't cold either. Clara finally spoke. "I don't think they came to my door by accident." Rowan didn't smile this time. She just nodded. "I don't think so either." Outside, wind pressed gently against the windows, as if the wild was watching. Inside, Clara leaned back in her chair. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. She was just there. And it was enough. The rehab center grew quiet after nightfall. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving just a skeleton crew and the soft glow of hallway lights. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the stars returned, sharp and frozen in the black sky. Clara didn't leave. She sat in the dim-lit observation room, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, legs pulled up to her chest. Through the glass window, she could see the recovery space where the wolves rested. The injured female stirred once, shifting in her straw bed. Her eyes blinked open slowly. The larger wolf lifted his head and leaned closer, his nose touching hers gently. No growl, no panic, just presence. "They love each other," Clara whispered aloud, even though no one else was there. The door creaked open. Rowan stepped in, carrying a hot water bottle. "Still awake?" Clara nodded. "I don't want to miss anything." Rowan passed her the water bottle and sat beside her on the bench. "They're stable. She's responding better than we hoped. Another day or two and we'll see real progress." Clara stared through the glass. "It's strange. I didn't realize how much I needed them until they were already inside." Rowan didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "That's how healing works. It arrives quiet and unexpected." They sat in silence. From the other side of the glass, the larger wolf turned suddenly. His eyes locked on Clara's through the glass wall. There was no fear in them, just recognition, as if to say, "Yes, you too." Clara placed her hand gently on the glass. A soft sound escaped the male wolf's throat. A hum. Not a howl, not a growl, something in between. Rowan leaned closer, whispering, "He knows you saved her." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I think they saved me too." In the heart of midnight, surrounded by glass and stars, something unspoken passed between woman and wolf. Not ownership, not gratitude, just understanding. By morning, everything changed. The injured wolf, still groggy, still healing, rose to her feet. It was slow, wobbly. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she stood. Clara gasped from the observation room. Rowan, watching beside her, grinned. "She's stronger than we thought." Inside the recovery pen, the male wolf stood immediately, not to block her, not to help, just to be close. She leaned against him for one breath, then stepped forward, one paw, then another. Dr. Harold entered quietly behind them. "She's starting to weight the leg, carefully, but that's a good sign." Clara pressed both hands to the glass. "She's walking." "She wants to walk," Harold corrected. "That's just as important." The female wolf crossed to the far side of the pen, nose lowered, sniffing the clean straw, the food dish, the small window above. Then, slowly, she circled back to her partner and laid down beside him, this time with a sigh of peace rather than pain. "She knows she's safe," Clara said softly. "She knows she's not alone," Rowan added. For the next few hours the wolves rested, waking now and then to drink or shift positions. The tension that had once coiled around them like wire was unwinding. Later, Rowan entered with fresh food. The male wolf didn't retreat. He watched. That was all. Clara joined to help refill the water bowls, her movements slow and steady. As she knelt, the female wolf looked up, eyes bright. Clara didn't reach out. She just whispered, "You're doing so well." The wolf blinked once, then lowered her head again. Trust. Silent and unmistakable. Back in the hallway, Dr. Harold updated his chart. "If this keeps up," he said, "we'll be talking about the wild again. Soon." Clara didn't answer, because for the first time, she felt the weight of that word. Soon. Soon, they might leave, and even if it was right, it would still hurt. 2 more days passed. The snow had begun to melt outside the rehab center, turning the roads to slush and the forest paths to mud. Inside, however, something else was thawing too. The female wolf walked more now, not just to stretch, but to explore. She sniffed corners, paced the wall, watched birds outside the window with a curious tilt of her head. Her limp remained, but so did her determination. Rowan jotted notes in her tablet. Mobility at 70%. Confidence at 100%. "She's ready," Dr. Harold said. Almost. The male never left her side. Even when she slept, he curled near. But Clara noticed he'd begun watching the window too, watching the trees, listening. And one morning, he howled. Not loud, not long, but deep and sure. The sound echoed through the halls like a memory. Rowan turned toward Clara. "He's calling home." Clara stepped into the recovery room quietly. She knelt down by the fence and looked at them. "You miss it, don't you?" The female wolf blinked slowly. The male simply stared. "I used to think staying alive meant staying safe," Clara whispered. "But now I wonder if it means returning." Rowan entered behind her. We've started prepping the release protocol, tracking callers, monitoring drones, soft re-entry zone. Clara nodded, heart tight. When? 3 days, weather permitting. 3 days. Clara ran her hand along the smooth edge of the wooden crate that would carry them partway into the wilderness. It looked so clinical, so final. Later that night, she sat alone again, journal open in her lap. She wrote, "They came to me broken. Now they're whole. And I'm somewhere in between." The stars blinked above the rehab roof. The wild was calling, and this time she wouldn't stand in its way. On the morning of the planned release, the sky had other ideas. Dark clouds rolled in fast, turning dawn into dusk. By midday, thick snow blanketed the road, and the wind howled louder than any wolf. Rowan slammed her tablet shut with a sigh. Storm's worse than forecast. We'll have to delay. Clara looked out the window at the swirling white. They're ready, and now they have to wait again. The wolves were quiet in their pen, but not still. The male paced more than usual. The female stared long at the glass, her ears twitching every time a gust of wind hit the building. Dr. Harold checked the weather monitor. This system might sit for 48 hours. I'd rather delay than risk transport in zero visibility. Clara nodded, but something in her stomach tightened. She didn't want them trapped again. Not physically, not emotionally. That night, she stayed beside them, curled in a sleeping bag just outside their pen. The wolves didn't sleep much either. The female rested her chin on her paws, but her eyes never closed. The male stood watch, his ears high, posture alert. Clara whispered through the wire fencing, "I know it's not fair. You were so close." The male turned his head slightly, as if he understood. Rowan brought her coffee in the early hours. "They know the wild's out there. You can feel it in them." Clara clutched the mug. "I wonder if I'm holding them back by being here." "You're not," Rowan said. "But maybe they're holding on for you too." That thought settled like snow on Clara's shoulders. Light, cold, impossible to shake. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the pine branch charm from her cabin, the one the male had once sniffed curiously. She slid it through the fence. "Something to carry with you," she murmured. The female sniffed it, then gently placed a paw on top. A promise. When the storm passed, they would go. Together. 2 days later, the sky cracked open into blue. Sunlight spilled over the forest again, glittering on the thawing snow. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the trees in icy ribbons. The world felt clean, ready. Clara stood at the edge of the rehab yard as the team loaded gear into the transport truck. Not a van this time, a specialized animal transport vehicle with temperature control and reinforced crates. Safe, but impersonal. Rowan checked the list one last time. Tracking collars are programmed, coordinates mapped, soft release zone cleared. Clara nodded. And the sedation? Just enough for calm, not unconscious. Dr. Harold appeared beside them, clipboard in hand. "No signs of infection. She's healed, both physically and emotionally, I'd say." The wolves were in the enclosure one last time. The male was restless, walking back and forth along the fence. The female sat near the gate, as if she already knew. Clara entered quietly. No gloves, no barrier, just presence. She crouched near them and whispered, "It's time." The male padded toward her and stopped inches away. His breath fogged in the morning air. Slowly, Clara raised her hand, and he leaned forward. Their foreheads almost touched. Not quite, but close enough. Rowan opened the gate, and the wolves moved forward without resistance. They stepped into the crate as if they understood this was not a trap, but a passage. Clara held her breath the entire time, Then the gate shut. Click. Final. As the truck doors closed and the engine hummed to life, Clara stood frozen in the melting snow, watching. She didn't cry. Not yet. Because this wasn't an end. It was the beginning of their story. She turned toward Rowan. "You'll let me know when they're out there, when they're free." Rowan smiled. "You'll be the first." And with that, the wolves rolled toward the trees. Home was waiting. The cabin felt different without them. Clara returned 2 days after the release. She didn't plan to, not at first. But her hands had found the keys anyway, and before she knew it, she was driving north along the same frozen path. The snow was melting now. The roof sagged with heavy slush, and icicles dripped steadily from the eaves. Inside, it was exactly as she left it. The firewood stacked by the door, the mugs still drying in the rack, a folded blanket on the couch, and silence. Too much silence. She lit a fire and sank into the armchair. Outside, ravens called from the trees, and a distant breeze rattled the branches. But it wasn't the wild howls she had grown used to. No padding footsteps, no yellow eyes at the window. Just stillness. She wandered the small space, fingers brushing familiar objects. The journal sat on the desk, still open to the last page she wrote. They came broken. Now, they're whole. She added, and I'm learning how to be whole too. A soft sound drew her to the back door. She stepped outside, snow crunching beneath her boots. The trail where they first arrived had faded now, half melted, half swallowed by new snowfall. But she could still see it, in her memory. Their arrival, their fear, their healing. Clara took the pine charm from her coat pocket, the one the female had touched, and hung it on the edge of her porch. A wind chime of sorts, a reminder. "I'll keep the fire going," she said aloud, though no one was there. The wind whispered back. Inside, she brewed tea and watched the forest through the window. Maybe they were out there, miles away, wild and free. Maybe they had already forgotten her, but she hadn't forgotten them, and never would. A week passed. Clara returned to her routines, morning tea by the fire, long walks through the thinning snow, scribbles in the journal that always ended with more questions than answers. But she felt it every hour. The absence. Not painful, just sharp. Then one morning, the satellite phone on her desk buzzed. A message from Rowan. Tracker pinged. Movement logged at Site Delta. Both callers active. They're staying close, still together. Clara stared at the screen, breath caught in her throat. They were alive. They were okay. And they hadn't split up. That night, she studied the map Rowan had given her, fingers tracing the marked release zone. It was far, days on foot, but not unreachable. Somewhere out there, among the pines and frozen streams, they were learning to be wild again. She stepped outside into the quiet. The stars blinked like watchful eyes. A thin crescent moon hung low. Clara tilted her head and listened. And then, so faint, she almost doubted it. It came. A howl, low, echoing across the ridge, carried by the wind like a whisper. She didn't know if it was him, didn't care, because it was enough. She stood there a while, arms folded, pine charm swaying in the wind beside her. Then she turned inside and wrote, "You're not mine. You never were. But thank you for letting me walk beside you for a while." She closed the journal, put out the lamp, and dreamed, for the first time in years, without fear. Clara couldn't stay away. 2 weeks after the release, she packed a light bag, just enough for a few days, and followed the map Rowan had given her. The snow was patchy now, melting into the forest floor. Spring was coming, and with it, change. The trail wasn't easy. Fallen branches, hidden ice. But Clara moved with purpose. Each footstep felt familiar, like she'd been here before in a dream. By dusk, she reached the ridge marked as Site Delta. It was beautiful. Tall evergreens circled a glade of soft moss and rock. A stream cut through the edge, its waters glittering orange in the fading light. Birdsong echoed faintly. No human sounds at all. She set up camp quietly. Just a mat, a sleeping bag, a small thermos of tea. No fire, no noise. She wasn't here to intrude. She was here to witness. Clara sat near a boulder, sipping her tea, scanning the tree line. For hours there was nothing, just the wind. Then, just before midnight, she heard it, a rustle. She didn't move. Out of the trees stepped a figure, four-legged, cautious, the male wolf. He paused at the edge of the clearing, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Behind him, the female emerged, whole, strong, limber. They didn't come closer, didn't need to. They just stood there watching her, and she, in turn, watched them. No words, no gesture, just a shared space between once lost things. After a while, the female gave a small grunt. The male turned, and they both disappeared into the forest without a sound. Clara's heart pounded, not in fear, but in awe. They remembered. They came back. And now, they had returned to the wild where they belonged. Clara stayed one more night in the clearing. She didn't expect the wolves to return, and they didn't. But somehow she felt their presence linger, like the warmth left behind after a fire goes out. In the morning, dew clung to the moss like scattered glass. Birds chirped lazily overhead, and the stream murmured its endless song. Clara packed her bag in silence, took one last look around, and whispered, "Thank you." The hike back was slower, not because she was tired, but because she kept stopping, to feel the bark of a tree, to watch a squirrel dart through branches, to breathe. Everything felt more alive. Back at the cabin, she opened the door like it was a new place. She brewed tea, lit the fire, and smiled at how quiet her heart had become. Later that day, Rowan called. "They're thriving," she said, "staying in the same range, hunting well, no signs of struggle." Clara leaned back in her chair, looking at the pine charm on the porch. "Then I won't go back. Not again." Rowan paused. "You sure?" "They need to forget me," Clara said gently. "That's how this works." But even as she said it, she knew forgetting wasn't the goal. Letting go was. She walked outside after the call, standing beneath the trees. Snowdrops were pushing up from the thawing ground. A fox trotted across the edge of the clearing and paused to look at her, then vanished. The wild was still wild, and she was still Clara, but something had shifted between them. Later, she sat at the desk and opened her journal one last time. We both survived. We both returned. And now, we walk different paths. But the same forest still knows our names. She closed the book. She didn't need to write more. The story was already written. In paw prints. In silence. In healing. Spring crept in gently, like a guest who didn't want to wake the house. The snow vanished first, slowly, reluctantly, until only a few stubborn piles clung to shaded corners. Then came the blooms. Tiny wildflowers poked through the forest floor, and green threaded its way through every branch and hill. Clara spent her days walking farther, not to find the wolves. She had promised herself she wouldn't seek them, but to reacquaint herself with a world that no longer scared her. She hiked new trails, left offerings of pine cones and herbs near the old clearing. Not as gifts, just as acknowledgments. I was here, and I still remember. One afternoon, she crossed paths with a group of hikers. Two young girls ran ahead of their parents, laughing and shrieking at the sight of a squirrel. Clara smiled and nodded as they passed, one of the girls glancing curiously at her weathered coat and quiet presence. In another time, she would have avoided them. Now she waved. Back at the cabin, Clara planted herbs outside: mint, lavender, a bit of sage. Her hands worked the soil easily, without the usual tremble. She even left the door open while she worked. Inside, her journal lay closed, finished. The pine charm hung in the window, catching light. Rowan called again. Still doing great. Moved into a new area near the southern ridge. Plenty of prey. No signs of stress. Clara smiled. They're making it their own. They're wild now, Rowan said. Completely. Clara stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. I always hoped they would be, she replied. That night, an owl called above the roof. She didn't flinch, just listened. Because the forest didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like home. It happened one evening, just as the sun dipped behind the trees. Clara had just set her tea down on the porch railing when she heard the crunch, soft, deliberate, of something stepping through the woods behind the cabin. Not a deer, not a squirrel. Something heavier. She stood slowly, heart steady, not afraid. She knew this rhythm by now. Nature didn't sneak. It announced. From the shadows a figure emerged, but not a wolf. A dog, thin, mud-covered, ragged fur and limping slightly. Its eyes locked onto hers, cautious but not wild, not aggressive, just tired. Clara stepped down the porch stairs and knelt. Hey there, she whispered. Where'd you come from? The dog hesitated. Then, slowly, it crept forward. Not too close. Just enough to show it wasn't running. Clara noticed the faint scar above its brow, the worn collar that hung loose around its neck. No tags, no name. She reached a hand out but didn't move closer. I've got some food if you're hungry. That night, she left a bowl of water and some chicken scraps just inside the porch. The dog didn't eat until Clara had gone back inside. But when she peeked through the window an hour later, the bowl was empty. The next morning, he was gone. But returned that night, and the next. By the third evening, the dog sat waiting on the porch like he belonged. Clara didn't speak much, didn't ask anything of him. She just let him be. Eventually, he let her brush the leaves from his fur, then rest beside the fire. She didn't name him. Not yet. She just called him friend. Because that's what he was. Another soul, wandering. Another creature finding refuge at the edge of the wild. And once again, Clara's home, her heart, had room for one more. Weeks passed. The dog, still unnamed, never left. He wasn't loud or needy. He didn't bark. He didn't chase squirrels or beg for attention. He simply followed Clara on her walks, slept near the fireplace, and watched the woods with the same quiet reverence she once saw in the wolves. Sometimes at night, he would lift his head and listen, not to cabin creaks or wind, but to something deeper, echoes carried from the forest. Clara noticed it too. A shift. The forest felt full again, not crowded, just whole. One afternoon, while gathering herbs along the southern ridge, she paused by a cluster of spruce trees. The dog froze at her side, ears high, eyes fixed. Across the glade, two shapes emerged. The wolves. The female stepped first, strong and confident, fur gleaming in the afternoon sun. The male flanked her, gaze steady. Neither of them moved closer. They didn't have to. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, not out of sadness, but awe. She whispered, "Hello again." The wolves stared. Then the male dipped his head once, a nod, a memory, a goodbye. The female turned first, padding back into the trees. The male lingered 1 second longer, then vanished. Clara stood there long after they were gone, her dog at her side, silent and still. She didn't chase, didn't call out. She smiled. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, one final page. Some animals come into our lives to be saved. Others come to save us. And a rare few? They just remind us we're not alone in the wild. She closed the book. The dog laid his head on her feet, and for the first time in years, she felt no trace of the woman who had once been lost in fear, only a woman who had found her way home by walking with wolves. The seasons turned once more. Spring melted into summer, and the forest sang in birdsong and buzzing life. Clara tended her herb garden, repaired the porch railing, and sometimes sat for hours just watching the sky shift from blue to gold. She wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The dog, who she now called Ash, slept beside her most days. He had filled the quiet with companionship, never asking, always present. On the anniversary of the wolves' release, Clara walked to the ridge one last time. She carried no food, no gear, just the pine charm from her cabin, now worn smooth by fingers and time. At the edge of the clearing where she'd once seen them last, she hung the charm on a low branch. A simple gesture, a final offering, not of longing, but of gratitude. She whispered into the wind, "You taught me how to return to myself." The breeze stirred the pine needles, and a raven cried overhead. As she turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Far off, barely visible, two shapes stood on the rise. She didn't lift her camera, didn't move closer. She just smiled and walked away. Back at the cabin, Ash wagged his tail and trotted to meet her. She sat on the porch, pulled him close, and whispered, "Let's stay a while." Inside, her journal remained closed on the shelf. The fire burned low, a kettle whistled, and somewhere, deep in the woods, a howl rose, distant, proud, and utterly free. Clara leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the sound wash over her. She had survived the silence. She had loved the wild, and now she belonged to it, forever.